But before I turn things over to him, just a couple of housekeeping things. Please turn off or silence your cell phones. Masks are to be worn the whole evening. Signed books are for sale at the register, and you can also pick up your prepaid Eventbrite orders there as well. We may have time for personalizing, TBD, because we do close at 9 p.m. Our interviewer today is Ben George, who is the editor of Little Brown. Quick little edit, but we're happy that he was able to do that. But he will be speaking to our featured author, James Hannaham. Hannaham is the author of novels God Says No, a Stonewall Book Award finalist, and Delicious Foods, which won the Penn Faulkner Award and the Hurston Wright Legacy Award, and was a Los Angeles Times Book Prize and Dayton Literary Peace Prize finalist, as well as a New York Times notable book. He lives in Brooklyn, where he teaches at Pratt Institute. His new book, Did Nobody Give a Shit What Happened to Carlotta, is a irreverent and utterly brilliant book, a story on a trans woman re-entry into the life on the outside after more than 20 years in prison over 4th of July weekend. So you're in for something special tonight. James will be reading from the book, then Ben will join in conversation, and you'll have a chance to ask your questions after that. So please join me in welcoming them to the stage. You sit in these chairs. This was for me. You did.
Good evening. My name is Carl Hancock Rux. Thank you, everybody, for coming out this evening. This somewhat. Actually, it's not raining, so.
Switch the pen.
No, I didn't. Is it not?
Talk into it.
No? Testing, testing. One of those things. Give myself a little extra. Thanks for coming out on this wet, it's definitely wet evening to hear me tell you a little bit about, let me tell you a little bit about Didn't Nobody Give a Shit What Happened to Carlotta. I mean, I guess they already told you a little bit about what is going on in the book, so I think maybe I will just read, since this is the inaugural reading that I'm doing, I thought I would read from the beginning of the book, which makes some sense. Perhaps I will not explain that much. As a benefit to all present. Okay. 2 decades and change into her beef, Carlotta Mercedes braced herself for audition number 5 with the New York State Board of Parole. She knew her many years in the SHU, 23/7 with no TV, no radio, no books, and no good touch, would probably blow her case this time too. With so many box hits, she couldn't finish any of the A&D programs the knuckleheads like to see. But solitary overkill wasn't the worst of her shots. Them son of a bitches said I had bad behavior, but their definition of bad behavior is if you scream when a CO whooping your ass like a Betty Crocker fudge cake. Why did she keep getting hit? Sometimes she thought her case grossed out the panel. Other times she blamed her mini beefs, the LOMs, the LOCs, the LORs, the LOVs. She knew the bosses were pretty much Klansmen, and at some point she always went apeshit. Those motherfuckers better let me out this time, she told Frenzy, the new man she was riding with out in the yard the day she heard. Who is they to judge my ass? Shut up, bitch, he soothed. You think you special? Don't expect nothing. You got nothing coming. Her eyes rolled behind her lids and she whacked her arms closed. I've been had known not to expect nothing forever by this time. 50 million motherfuckers already done told me how much nothing I got coming. So let's see it. Where my nothing at? And who's more of specials than I is? Her tongue had slipped a little out of fear that he didn't really have eyes for her, or big enough ones. Anyway, she felt like some kind of monkey mouth even before she'd shut her trap. If you want out, you better learn to talk right, Frenzy said, flashing a dimple. Folks be talking proper out there. Oh yeah, since when? She gave him face and flipped her hair so it grazed his nose. In 1993, Carlotta's cousin Cafele had shot some old lady who sold little bottles of Thunderbird to the skells of Bed-Stuy and put her to sleep for a month. Carlotta was in attendance, showing off her talent for bad timing. The lady woke up again, but the bullet lowered her IQ to a chimpanzee's, and she could hardly brush her own teeth anymore. Kathy landed in Attica, doing all day and a night. Mama must have stopped saving his supper. Carlotta turned state's evidence and still got 12.5 to 22. The public defender called that getting off with a reduced sentence, but to Carlotta, that didn't sound like getting off in any way, shape, or form. The robbery or the aggravated assault with a deadly weapon could have gotten you 25 each, the judge whined. You're lucky to be doing them concurrently. That's luck, then fuck luck. Sleeping Beauty's daughter, Noreen Green, always dragged her bitter puss up to the hearings, and she made no exception for this sequel in the franchise. She dug harsh sentences. She thought that if you croaked before you killed your number, they wouldn't dump your carcass off-site. When she shouted, "I want their bones to turn to dust in the prison cell," she meant it literally. She had spat that oratory at the public defender, a pale, mousy girl with big glasses who looked like a PhD candidate in macrame. Made the poor thing spaz and knock her coffee all over her papers, which show you how good the bitch had her shit together, not at all. Before Carlotta's time on the catwalk that day, they'd kept her in the shoe, and of course the COs tried to yank her out before her toilette. She hadn't finished drying her sink-washed locks and massaging mess hall margarine into her scalp when they banged on the door, barking like Dobermans selling wolf tickets about an upcoming beatdown. I was like, ho-hum, another, because I know they wasn't going to do nothing to me right before no damn parole hearing, or maybe they was gonna, but I didn't give a fuck. Part of her wanted to risk an ass whooping, but the minute she clocked the reality, getting scalped with a bare hand, a Doc Marten jammed in her ribcage, animal fear took over. Her body cashed a check at her memory bank, and she could feel the fists and boots of yesteryear colliding with tender body parts. One time, a CO belted her in the face, and she almost made a meal of her own tongue. I was talking like Daffy Duck for 2 fucking weeks. And of course, they punished her for getting punished. Against her will, her mind snapped back to the worst of the worst, a scumbag called Dave, and something inside her gave way like a noose going slack after doing the strange fruit swing. Carlotta pushed her paws through the bean slot and let the COs cuff her, but she hadn't finished her face. She only had the blue pool cue chalk smuggled in from the juvie wing on her left eyelid. This gon' look bad. It do look bad. If they got no kick from paroling what some of these jerk-offs called he-she things with painted faces, no way would they spring a freakazoid with just one blue eyelid. The minute she saw her chance, she leaned over and smudged her blinker with the one chalky finger she still had, trying to keep everything clear of her headlights, because that might juice her eyeball like a lemon. Or maybe I should do like a fountain if that gonna get them on my side. They didn't let her shower either. As she swung past the cells in the cinder block alley, she could smell her funk through her prison grays. And she hoped nobody else got a whiff. Probably can't nobody smell nothing over the stench of this joint nohow. Let's just say her look did not kill. But the peanut gallery whooped it up regardless. All piercing whistles, hey mommies, and do fries go with that shakes. Up at Ithaca, a lady didn't always have to bust her sparkle. These lusty hustlers weren't faking the flattery either. No way, Jose. Some could take a mocking tone, but if she shook the tree, Carlotta knew she'd get a real nut. Oh, honey, at this point, they'd fuck a mop. She beamed at the guys and wiggled her fingers as she passed, letting the handcuffs and chains stand in for the rocks and bling she'd have preferred. She couldn't call these suckers suckers, but why not gloat now, knowing the spotlight of parole would never beam down on such luckless gangsters, the same spider monkeys who'd bitten her like Rottweilers mauling a chew toy, passed her around like a spliff until the last tiny red ember in her soul almost winked out with a little puff of smoke. Fuck these guys, they never even get a hearing, let alone 5. Maybe my ass be the Susan Lucci of parole. If any of this crew did get parole or even release when hippos fly, they'd probably leap back into their hustle toot sweet and boomerang into these same cells. Carlotta's hellos took on the saccharine taste of scorn. Goodbye, Beezus. Goodbye, poor little stink bug. Ciao bella, glitch, you cold-blooded motherfucker. But who could tell if they'd finally boot her out of the joint? Carlotta knew what time it was. She wasn't bumbling around in Pampers, but a bitch got a dream. After the whole get smart routine with the halls and gates and checkpoints came to an end, the COs pushed open a green door, green like Frankenstein, and there sat 3 poker faces from the NYSPB. See evil, hear evil, and speak evil. Fingers poised on padfolio stuffed with the details of every beef they'd give a shot that day. Look at them smug-ass faces. They think they some kind of god sitting at a tribunal going to decide my fate, which I guess they kind of are. Uh-oh, fuck me. The second their prisoner made it in, the COs whipped the metal door back and locked it. Clang! The clang rang out in the room like a pipe hitting a lamppost, but Carlotta had heard this noise so often that to her, it could have been a butterfly fart. In the back left of the room, a few yards from where the guards plopped Carlotta into a standard-issue government chair, Noreen Green sat squinting, crinkling her hand inside a plastic snack bag of, was it pretzels? Or popcorn? Popcorn? Like my suffering is fucking entertainment for your stupid ass? Unlike most victims, Noreen had some sort of special dispensation that allowed her to be in the room. More like a cousin who a judge or some shit, and had dragged her malfunctioning parent with her, this time in a wheelchair. Maybe she thought some extra visual oomph would get Carlotta buried under the jail the way she wanted. The mom, Dorothy, sat silent, lolling her head side to side, grinding her teeth. In any case, she looked cranky. The lights were on in that noggin, but somebody had locked the door. Kathy specifically. She seemed worse off than last time, season 19, episode 4. Oh shit, she brought her again? This fucking sucks. Why do I even bother? One of the panel's poker faces, none of whom Carlotta recognized, this must be a new crew, maybe they're gonna see my beef different, belonged to a white guy with a baldy bean, round and rough as a basketball. He had on a too-tight suit, probably from a discount outlet. His giant biceps puffed out the sleeves. So much for tailoring. Dead center sat a 50-ish white lady in a black blouse rocking frosted highlights and oversized bifocals. She could pass for a daytime talk show host from the 80s. Maybe she'll spring me in exchange for some style tips. The woman kept twisting her gold rings like Gollum or somebody. Off to the right, Carlotta felt judgment pouring from the stink eye of a black woman with tiny rectangular glasses and a conservative hairdo in the shape of the Liberty Bell, wearing a suit the color of a grape popsicle. She had a more mysterious look about her than the other two, and that sparked fear in Carlotta. She don't look like the type who gonna give you no racial break. She looked like the type who gonna give you a hard time because they think you're gonna try some nigga trick they already know being a nigga themselves. Try to catch you out when you ain't even fronted. The tribunal got the ball rolling by stating their names. Demonicus Johnson? Demonicus? You black? You look too light to be a brother, but you never know. Helen Alcinous and Malaya Thune, but the names vanished from her head in no time. Damn, I can't never remember nobody's name, not even when my life literally depend on it. COs must have knocked my memory clean out my head. Sometime I wish they had. The drab chair had a green seat with a rip down the middle, a hole that seemed, like every hole did now, like a good place to stow a shank or stash some molly. Moving her fingers between her legs, she probed the opening to see if someone else had gotten there first and left her a present. She almost forgot to react when Basketball Head piped up. "Can you please state your name for the record?" he asked. Carlotta had picked up a reflex for whenever a boss quizzed her. She knew she had to fake like mad, to knuckle under like a trained bear riding a unicycle and balancing a ball on its nose at some Ringling Brothers joint. You had to stuff your ego up your ass and kowtow to the COs and the other shitheads. You had to grind your attitude into a fine powder and try to look as tame as a ringding, what with the mogwai raising hell in your skull all the time, making you so rowdy, so loco, Sometime it just be them up there and too. What my ass wasn't nowhere near that brain. She knew she couldn't tell him her name. An honest answer to even this Mickey Mouse question would bring down enough drama to keep her on ice until she hit the half-century mark. She jammed her frustration into her stomach and took a gander at Basketball Head again. He reminded her of one of those Chinese dogs with the smushy muzzles. What they call that? She could not say Carlotta Mercedes, and she knew it. She pushed her fingers deeper between her legs, careful not to disturb Signora Problema, and tugged at the strings hanging off the sides of the break in the vinyl. Could be every con who ever sat in this chair had done a little fraying. Frenzy had flopped 7 times to her 4, and he had the knowledge. The board ain't gonna ask you no questions they don't got the answers to right there in that jacket, he told her. And don't be altercating with how they spin your beef, okay? Because if you tell them they wrong, especially when they is wrong, they just gonna give you the heave-ho and bum rush your ass right back to D-Block. It had slipped her mind to ask if her name change would rattle them, but now it seemed like duh. To call herself Carlotta right off the bat would be suicide. It would lead back to Dave. The thought hollowed her out. She snarfed down a loogie, trying not to show off too much hate for her dead name, closed her eyes so she could roll them without the board seeing, and sucked in a big breath. Dustin Chambers, sir, she said. Then she yanked her hands from between her thighs, raised her wrists, cocked her head to one side, and tried to push her hair back with both cuffed hands. Not easy, so she did it slowly, fanning out her fingers as she went, trying to kill Dustin Chambers again and shout Carlotta Mercedes with body language alone. I'm sorry, can you repeat that? Said Basketball Head. Carlotta froze, dropped her hands back in her lap, and locked her jaw. I know I said that shit loud enough, and I know you heard me. Frenzy had coached her on this too. They gonna try to get your go, he'd said. Provoke you to see if you gonna freak out and fuck up, which make their job easier because they get to send your ass right back to the joint. That shit you definitely gotta resist. Don't give them nothing. Anger management, Carlotta thought. It was just a phrase, though. She had never had any real training. Anger management. She squeezed her knees and counted down from 10 in her head. She figured that was how people on TV kept from flipping out. In her mind, a song her mother used to sing along with in her Colombian accent took over. Think about what you're going to do to me. But she gave no outward sign of inward singing. A little smile found its way onto her face, though. Its fakeness felt like a layer of hot wax over her real face. She swallowed again and said the name again, at an almost mocking volume. She pretended he'd asked for her brother's name. Dustin Chambers! Now, Mr. Chambers, he kept on, I have here that you've served 20 years of a 12.5 to 22 sentence on an armed assault and robbery. Carlotta nodded, not counting the year in jail for the sentences, but I ain't gonna split no hairs, and said, that is correct. How I could have did the whole 21 and then some is I'm a fucking bruja. Basketball Head softly wheezed, armed assault and robbery, all the time scribbling some note with a ballpoint pen, probably the thing he just said. Miss Thune took over, like a script she and Basketball Head had to follow. I guess they kind of do got a script. Her voice had a surprisingly smoky, luscious quality. Frenzy had schooled her on how you didn't need any real bona fides to get on a parole board, and that thought looped in her mind as she listened, trying to knock them off whatever pedestal they thought they were on. Miss Lady Day here could use that voice to be singing standards on Saturdays down at the local mother lodge. But her voice also sounded serious, like a newscaster's. Mr. Chambers, can you give us a detailed picture of what took place on that night, the night of August 14th, 1993? This I could do. She concentrated on talking proper. Saturday night. It was about sundown, around 8:22 p.m., and I was on my way to my best friend's birthday party. As I'm walking over there, I had the intention to hit the Sippy Sip liquor store located at 726 Myrtle Avenue, corner of Walworth Street. She paused. Shoot, I mean buy something from there, not hit it like rob it. I was going to grab a bottle of Andre or something and then stop in at Gloria's Thrift Gifts, which is a shop just up the street, so I can get a present for my friend. They closed at 9 because Gloria didn't usually even show up until around 3 on Saturdays. She from Trinidad. And lo and behold, I see my cousin Kathy crossing Myrtle, and I'm like, hey! And he's like, oh, so you also going to Doodle's party? Her name is Deirdre, but everybody calls her Doodle. He's like, no, I'm going to Sippy Sip. And he points to it because we're only a block away on Spencer. And I said, so am I. She had rehearsed this saga maybe 300 times, and her lawyer had coached her to curb her potty mouth and include small details like exact times and the names of streets and establishments to boost her cred. Nowadays it came more or less naturally, but she could rattle it off like something she had memorized, like shit that happened to somebody else's ass. Miss Thune rifled through the papers on her clipboard and stared at something written there. Mr. Chambers, I believe the record states that at that moment you were carrying a loaded weapon, were you not? That is true, yes. Were you not? What the fuck, all this stupid language? Why they gotta talk like that in a Shakespeare play all the fucking time? Romeo, Romeo, wherefore art thou's ass in the hole? Are you the sort of person who carries a loaded weapon to a birthday party? What kind of condescending bullshit question is that? Who's gonna be fool enough to say yes to that? Like, yes ma'am, I'm so crazy I'd bring a flamethrower to a baby shower. As a gift. Now parole me or I'm gonna bite off your titty. What? But Frenzy had given her hell about telling them exactly what they wanted to hear at every possible fucking moment she could. She thought about his full, wet lips talking, how the sneaky soul patch under them wiggled like a caterpillar. Then the eyes in her mind found their way around his body to a tattoo of a phoenix spanning his entire back. At the time, the record states that I was ma'am, but since I've been inside, I have done a great deal of work to change who I am. I have been a part of the recovery program even though I did not have a substance abuse problem. I gained permission to do laundry duty through my years of good behavior, and I even worked briefly in the law library. I guess in Bed-Stuy in them days, there almost wasn't really no other type of person but one who was holding, because the other type was called dead. Carlotta widened her eyes. She saw the left side of the black lady's cheek twist upward slightly. Also, I spent about 6 of them years in solitary because of how much I got raped and beat up, and I quit them substances cold turkey, but fuck it, they don't want to hear none of that. Plus, that shit didn't even help. It helped Dave. She heard the scenes in her mind again, and the blood rushed out of her head. Ray, leave me alone, you son of a bitch. Somebody help. I'm concerned that you're making light of this situation, Mr. Chambers, Basketball Head barked, bouncing his ballpoint clicker on the desk. Noreen grunted from the peanut gallery. She shook herself out of the starry-eyed dizziness for a second. Oh, it ain't no light, don't worry about that. Carlotta felt she had lost Basketball Head already, and since the vote had to be unanimous, the ladies would need to struggle hard against him if they wanted to grant her parole. That didn't look too likely. Another day, another hit. I only got a year and a half left anyway, so I mean, fuck it. Maybe I should just kill my number and kick it with my man. Her hand went back to fiddling with the rip in the chair. Basketball Head sure had a brick wall for a body. Did that cop attitude make him sexier or not sexy? Maybe sexy as some other bitch at parole hearing. Suddenly, he pushed all the papers off the table, grabbed her by the shoulders, spucked her ass pussy silly, and granted her parole when he came. No, he ain't really did that. That's just my little fantasy. I'm not, sir. I just felt at the time I needed to be ready for pretty much anything. I also adore guns. Damn, it's too fucking easy to fuck this up. But I can't give up. Maybe the women gonna be on my side. My sisters. Sorta? The white lady with the frosted hair didn't ever say anything, but she smiled. Not a big smile, but a steady one, like the Virgin Mary. So Cousin Kathy and I walk in the store together. I start looking for the discount liquors. Doodle ain't that picky. And before I know what's happening, Kathy had pulled a gun on the lady behind the counter. But there was a bulletproof cage for the cashier. But Kathy always been cute. He don't look threatening, even though he actually a real dangerous dude. He pretended to have a question about a bottle of Malibu rum or something. Like he deliberately chose a sweet type of liquor so she wouldn't get suspicious. And he got Mrs. Green to come out the cage. And that's when he pulled out the gun. She tried to go back in, but he yanked her out. Everybody heard Noreen sniffle and then blow her nose, making a sound like a broken trumpet. People turned for a second to look at her and her mother until the image got too sad. And what did you do? Miss Thune asked. tugging down a purple sleeve. She know what I did. She seen the damn videotape. This complete bullshit. I'm gonna tell her what I said instead. I said, Kathy, what the F are you doing? We're not about to rob this joint. If you need money, I will lend you money. We will find you money somewhere, but don't do this and don't drag me into it neither. I said, ain't you supposed to be getting a GED? Didn't you want to be an engineer? But he didn't pay me no mind. Later, I heard he was doing it for a promotion in his gang. I was like, gang? What gang he could join at his age? The Little Rascals? He knew I was holding, so he yelled at me to cover him while he went into the little room and jacked the register. Did you cover him? No, ma'am, I did not. But that's part of what caused the problem. See, Kathy pulled Mrs. Greene into the room by the neck and made her take the money out the register, but somehow she got away and started to stumble out the little room. That's when Kathy shot her. For the life of me, I do not know what possessed him to aim at her head. He had a very difficult upbringing. We all did. You guys have had a rough time, the Virgin chimed in. He's serving a life sentence. Yes, that's correct. And probably will never get no parole given what happened to me. It should be longer, Noreen yelled at nobody with stabbing anger. Longer than life? Like they gonna put a jail cell around his grave? Honest to God, honey, he ain't going nowheres. How do you account for the fact that, on the surveillance camera video, you can clearly be seen drawing your own weapon, Mr. Chambers, said the Virgin, pushing her glasses up to the bridge of her nose for the 9th time to rest in the kidney-shaped divots there. She had upped her angle, Carlotta suspected, because her previous comments had seemed soft. You two-faced hoe. Y'all got my goat, okay? Y'all done curried my motherfucking goat. Around that same moment, I aimed my weapon at Kathy, trying to get him not to shoot the woman, but it was too late. If you could hear sound on that video, you'd hear me shouting, Kathy, don't shoot! Put the gun down! I didn't ever fire my gun, either. Basketball Head came in for the kill. You're aware, though, that it appears that you are aiming directly at the cashier? Here we go again. Yes, sir, I am aware of that, sir. Mrs. Greene was between the two of us, and that makes it difficult to tell. But y'all has seen the footage, and y'all know that the cinematography or whatever, it ain't that good. It was an old line. The women smiled, but not Basketball Head. The ballistic evidence also had shown that I didn't fire any gun. I'm a fucking dead duck. Like a Peking duck hanging in the window of the skankiest greasy spoon joint in Chinatown. Malaya Thune took over, her voice mellow and motherly, almost tender now. Perhaps Carlotta had misjudged her. Do you have any regrets about your part in this crime? Oh gosh, she said, jumping at the chance to show remorse. I got this. Regrets. Talk about regrets. If you drilled a hole in my heart, right here, Carlotta said, jabbing her ribcage with her thumb, jangling the cuffs, or anywhere really, y'all would see all the regret draining out of me like I was an aquarium tank and the water was regret. Then once all the regret had spilt out, my whole body would flop down like an empty garbage bag because there wouldn't have been hardly nothing inside me but regret. I eat, sleep, and dream about regret ever since this happened. My life became a path with a fork in it when all that happened, and there's nothing I wish I could do more than go back and take that other road, the one that didn't lead to no 20 years in prison, to no none of this, except getting with frenzy. I wish I didn't have a cousin Kathy, and I almost wish I ain't had a best friend Doodle, especially one who had a birthday party that night. I wish I didn't have a gun on me. More like I wish I had left it home. That shit was my favorite gun. An absolutely gorgeous Mama Micromax with a mother-of-pearl inlay. Inlay cost me $1,500 I saved for 2 years. Never gonna see that shit again. I ain't got nothing but regret. Frenzy had instructed her to play it up when they asked about guilty feelings. She wondered if she'd overdone it, but she had to admit that she actually felt about 80% of what she'd said. Just saying the words made her eyes filled with tears. Like the actress she'd named herself for, she whipped up the memory of her fucked up past into a meringue of mostly real emotion. I'll stop there. Now, ladies and gentlemen, we'll be joined by George.
James is lucky.
You're no relation to Phyllis, are you? I've never asked you that question.
Not that I know of.
Okay.
No. Lucky for me, this is my second chance getting to work with James. I also got to edit his second novel, Delicious Foods. One thing that I don't know if you can reconstruct. I know that sometimes it's hard for writers to like reconstruct exactly how a book came together. Once you get so far down the line, it's kind of like alchemy. You don't even always remember, but you all are getting a sense of the book. But one of the things that's really fascinating about it is the way it works, just kind of on its own level, but it also has all these other ambitions. It's signifying on the Odyssey, on Ulysses, and you kind of really get that sense of this picaresque journey throughout the book. What's interesting is like John Irving reviewed it in the New York Times Book Review. Didn't mention that at all. Just like talk about the experience of the novel, and then this other.
Yeah, the bastard.
No, what I mean is you don't have to know. It's cool. You don't have to know anything about the Odyssey or Ulysses to love the novel and just get on this one level. And then another amazing review in the LA Times went all into it in all the ways that James is playing around with it. I think he called it a righteous transgender remix of the Odyssey. But so there are just all these things that you're doing, like in the stew of the novel, if you will, dealing with a trans woman who's been in a men's prison for more than 20 years. You're riffing on the Odyssey and Ulysses. You're dealing with carceral justice, coming up with this amazing voice for Carlotta. I'm curious if you can talk about what was the first germ? How did I know you had an interest in carceral justice.
Snowball.
Yeah, I knew you wanted to do that for a long time.
This book.
And
I mean, some of it I think was after Delicious Foods had its, was successful in the way that it was successful. I felt a number of things. One, I felt like I had a little bit of cultural capital to spend, and I thought, well, who should I spend that on? Well, perhaps my people. And in a certain way, that meant a lot of different things, right? But I think one of the things that it meant was New York more than anything else, right? Because my first two books were set in the South, and they were ostensibly about a kind of social environment that I think is pervasive throughout the country, but is more concentrated perhaps, or more obvious, more on the surface in the South than it is in the North. Which is not to say that it's not here, but maybe in some places even worse than it is in the South. But I have a long history with this neighborhood. My father's side of the family bought a brownstone here in the 50s, and a couple of my cousins still live in it, and they've been sort of gradually trying to renovate it forever. And then I moved here about 20 years ago, but before that it had just been like the place where my grandmother lived, and I would visit my grandmother here. And at the time, it was considered a dangerous neighborhood, and people were like, "Oh, you don't go to Fort Greene." But to me, it wasn't that. It was just I'd sit out on the stoop all day, like essentially like waiting for my dad to come and pay attention to me and my brother and sister, or take us to the beach or what have you. So there was, I realized at a certain point that I had this kind of granular knowledge of this area that I wanted to use to some kind of advantage, because I'd avoided writing about New York because I felt it was kind of overdone, right? But then I was like, oh, but I have all this like stuff that I know about this very specific place, and I've watched it change over the course of 50 or 100 years, right? And I wanted to use that in some way. And I mean, this is a really long description, so hunker down here. So that was really the initial germ. So I guess my research started when I was a child. And then that made me say, well, who could I write about that could make that work? Like, I couldn't just write about somebody just walking around and saying, oh, this has changed. There had to be some like dramatic underpinning to it. So I thought, oh, maybe somebody who's been in prison the whole time or been away in some way. And I thought, oh, prison was something, the carceral system was a thing that I wanted to, deal with on some level for a while. And so that got attached to that. And then I said to myself, well, who are we really forgetting about in prison? And I thought, well, or who would I be if I was in prison? And my initial, my initial thought was like, as a gay man, I would be really in trouble in various ways in prison. I mean, not that everyone who's in prison is not in trouble in some way, but like, So, I mean, I started doing a lot of reading about, both sort of things that have been put out by organizations like, nonprofit organizations and fictional things. I think one of the first things I did was watch Oz, of all things. But it just to kind of give me an idea of like what was already out there and how I could not tell the same story that everybody's telling all the time. And I think that I ended up realizing that one of the things that people don't really deal with a lot in prison areas is recidivism. The fact that a lot of people who get sentenced to things are not sentenced for their entire life, and they have to come back to society and somehow figure out, with not a whole lot of guidance, how to normalize this and not that, right? When that is, an incredibly intense environment, you come back here and there's nobody like waking you up and telling you what to do every day. There's no like sense of sort of tension and fear.
There's amazing scenes where Carlotta will like open and close a door just because, oh wow, she just like can't get over the feeling of I get to do this for myself again.
Yeah, I mean there are a lot of sort of little things that I heard people who I've talked to about their experiences in prison tell me that were really fascinating. Like the thing about flushing the toilet a lot, because like, you're in this small cell with this one toilet, and like, oh, hello, did my mic just go out? Okay. Hello. You can hand me the battery back. You can give me the handheld. All right. You're in this cell with like just the toilet and you and like I feel like the compulsion to. I understand the compulsion to keep flushing the toilet. It's sort of a way of keeping everything clean, relatively. All right, so there was that layer, and then I realized that telling in the story of somebody coming back from upstate New York necessarily means you're retelling the Odyssey, because of the central New York military tract. Because after the Revolutionary War, when they were giving away native lands to soldiers who've been in the Revolutionary War, there was this one guy in the office that was responsible for like cutting all the land up, who was really into classical literature. And so he gave a lot of the upstate townships and villages classical names. And I was like, okay, so I guess I'm retelling the Odyssey in some way. So I have to acknowledge that on some level. But then I was like, oh, it's kind of tired. Everybody's done that. But then around that same time, my husband, who is of Irish descent, he's Irish American, he took me to Ireland. Or I should say we went to Ireland together for the first time. And he knows all of his relatives out there, and we spent some time in the countryside. And I thought, well, I'll bring a representative work of literature from Ireland. And it was Ulysses, which I knew was a sort of retelling of the Odyssey. So sort of during that trip, as I let my eyes pass over it in a sort of cross-eyed glaze, wondering, what the hell am I reading? I decided I was going to try to incorporate that as well. So I think part of it was that I just, after Delicious Foods, I was like, I'm not sure, because at the same time, okay, around the same time, I also got a full-time teaching job. And all of these bets I'd made about my life that I thought were like too high were actually happening. So I said to myself, like, I don't know how not to struggle. So why don't I just make this book the most difficult freaking thing I could possibly make it?
Is it true that you tell your students that they should write like they're trying to commit career suicide?
I tell Rye Curtis that.
Okay.
But I mean, that is sort of what I was talking about when I said, you know, like, I have this cultural capital to spend, sort of, so like, why don't I, you know, spend it on people, you know, who I think deserve to be looked at, to be, you know, but not in a way that's like, I'm trying to be the hoochie coochie man for like the establishment, right? And my perverse desire is that the kind of people whom the book is about will enjoy and be entertained by the book. So, and not like, you know, want to run me out of town on a rail and like cut my head off or whatever, right? Even symbolically. So that's a lot of what was in my mind as I was working, which is kind of a lot, I know. There's more.
Well, we haven't even mentioned, I think that everyone will have started to get a sense of it, but in terms of like setting the bar very high, besides for all of those, I guess what I would call larger decisions, structural decisions, like at the level of the line, you know, you all can hear where there's a kind of, I guess I'll say a third person narrator going along, and then Carlotta herself is always, you know, cutting in with sort of these, you know, interior monologues. But when you see it on the page, the way that it works is that these are sometimes happening within the same sentence. So it's like going along, you know, Carlotta, and then, you know, back out into the sentence. And so I never, you know, I could just be indicating my own, you know, lack of some reading that I should have done. But I had never seen anybody use this technique before. And I'll be honest, when I first, you know, had the draft of it and started reading it, I was thinking to myself, like, oh man, I'm gonna have to figure out how to fix this. I don't know what we're gonna do about this. But then it only took me about, you know, a few pages to fall into it and go, oh wow, this is really extraordinary, this technique and how he's just like within the lines completely melding.
It's just a matter of removing some periods, really, and capitalizing a word.
No, that's it's underselling what it actually does, which is like a totally seamless movement back and forth.
Well, it's got to seem that way anyway for it to work, right?
Yeah.
Because I could do it in such a way that like I knew what was happening, but it wasn't being communicated properly. And that's, I mean, we were talking a little bit earlier. We had a drink out. We were talking. It was you and I, right? It was before Ben got there. We were talking about clarity and how clarity is one of those things that people talk about in writing programs and all that kind of thing. And I was trying to explain that, like, for me, clarity is not just I understood every word and all of the sentences made sense to me and like I read through this and I wasn't confused at all. It actually means that the writer has an intention, no matter what it is. It can be the craziest intention imaginable, but you have to try to make that intention legible, as we like to say at Pratt. and you know, part of that is just finding a technique that makes it clear what you want, how you want people to read something. And you know, punctuation is one of those things that has an expressive capability within prose, right? And not a lot of people take advantage of that. And when they do too much of it, they're considered experimental and they're marginalized. And so, but I think people who are readers understand, you know, I mean, I guess I'm putting a lot of faith in readers, essentially, by saying like, here, I think everybody is smart enough to pick up on this.
Yeah, I think it proves out, and that's what everyone has said, even, you know, the people who do comment on it. So I want to make sure, like, if there are other questions that people have, we get to them, but I have one more that I'm interested in for myself. So you talked about all these kind of, bigger ambitions for the book and, how, snowballed together. But one of the things that everybody who's read the book says about it is how utterly unforgettable Carlotta is. I mean, she's just one of the all-time great, like, American original characters. You cannot forget her. Once you've read this, you can't stop, rooting for her, even though she's kind of this, glorious train wreck that sometimes you love and sometimes exasperates you. So out of all this, like, when, and how did that voice start coming to you, and how did you start hearing it? How did she begin to take shape for you as this amazing character?
I mean, it's funny that that you were saying this even, but it's kind of I guess it's a sort of kind of street voice that I hear in the back of my head, like, it's not unlike Scotty in certain ways, right? Who was the voice of crack cocaine in Delicious Foods. I was very
also
conscious.
the only novel that personifies a drug that I know of. James only does things that no one else has done before. That's kind of his
MO. I'm allergic to boredom. I was told that by a friend of mine. But it was something, I mean, many years ago, I wrote a story called Tragedy in Burgundy that appeared in nerve.com. That was kind of not in exactly the same kind of voice, but I had seen this episode of, I think it was Maury Povich actually, where these like trans girls went on Maury Povich, and there was like some kind of reveal, like, I'm not a biological female. And then like, all these brothers like tore up the set. It was like they were throwing chairs and everything. And I kind of wrote this story that was kind of, it was a letter of apology to the host of the show, like sort of on the part of one of the trans girls who had been involved. Who's like, but I mean, so I guess the character was kind of half formed already, and when I realized that what I was going to do was write about somebody who was LGBT, this voice just came and said to me, "Bitch, I'm gonna be the star." And I said, "Okay, Carlotta, we're gonna be the star." And I mean, I don't like to talk about creating characters in ways that are like flaky. Like, I feel like there are some people some writers who talk about like how they seem to have no control, and like the character just came to me and flooded me, and I just did what they told me to do. But in this case, I felt a little bit like that was kind of true. It was not as hard for me as it might seem to people who are reading the book for the first time.
Was that the same with the Scotty voice from Delicious Foods, when you just like hear such a singular voice?
Well, I was really enjoying writing Scotty's voice, and I mean I've told this story a bunch of times, but like when I was writing that book, I was writing. It was another problem of narration. I think I'm really interested in the problem of narration, so I was writing a third person about a drug addict. And it didn't feel honest to me that a drug addict would have total recall about all these things that had happened while she was like, while she was addicted. And so I was writing from a kind of third person, like over her shoulder, but in a kind of like, street kind of voice that I thought was going to be more like the main character. But then I decided I wanted her to be somebody who had had some chances and blown them completely. Because that was kind of what used to happen on that show, Intervention. It was always more poignant when there was somebody who like, the shot put star, who's like completely strung out on meth or whatever. That was always just like, oh God, they had potential and they ruined it. So I wanted Darlene to be like a little bit more like that. But then I was like, all right, then who is this voice? And one of the ideas that came to me was, oh, this is the drug. And I feel like I'd heard of some other things that were not dissimilar. Like, I don't know who,
You
Isn't
should
there
get
like,
Delicious Foods tonight too, if you haven't read that.
it's available in stores.
Yes.
I feel like there were some, I can't think of them right now, but I know that there were some, books that have been narrated from unusual sorts of characters like that, who were maybe abstract or like not non-real. And I thought, okay, somebody called it magic realism without the magic.
But you were talking about how fun that is, so was Carlotta less fun, more challenging in a way, or what do you mean?
Well, I think Carlotta was one of the least challenging things about the book, for me, as a writer, and flowed much faster than the idea that each of the scenes has to be set up in such a way that, for me, and this was really just for me, I wasn't trying to impress English professors or anything. It was really just, I was creating a scaffolding using Ulysses and the Odyssey, and just kind of making jokes about them, more or less. So probably every scene has some relationship to Ulysses, the Odyssey, or both. But then I started to notice that there were all these things that kind of lined up with what I wanted to do anyway. There was some point at which Leopold Bloom is referred to as the modern feminine man, or something like that. He's feminized in this kind of interesting way. And that wasn't something I anticipated at all. And I was like, oh, that's sort of, I see the lineage potential here. So anyway, I think maybe people want to
Yeah,
ask.
anybody questions?
We can have an awkward few.
Yeah, we'll leave time for the awkward silence and the pause as someone ponders.
This is a really long awkward one.
Yeah.
What do you think?
Well, I mean, I don't want to. Yes,
there we go.
right there.
I guess one just off the top of my head. In the reception you've been getting in reviews and talking to people, I mean, this is a basic question, but what are some that have surprised you more than others?
Every last one! Whether they've been good or bad, I've just been and there's really only one bad one. But I think, every time it's just I hope this one is good, I hope this, and I'm really excited that people are responding to it in positive ways, because I know that I was taking a bunch of different risks, and it was my sincere feeling that in all these arguments about people writing outside of their identity, for lack of a better way of expressing it, what people understand is the difference between someone writing from a sense of paternalism and scorn and superiority, and somebody who's writing out of a sense of love and understanding and humor and all that good shit, right? So it's really gratifying to me that people are understanding that understanding my intentions.
How much research did you do? Just talking to people and.
I wish there was a research unit. I did 500 reviews of research. It's hard to know, but it was a lot. I read a lot of I think I started out reading a lot of fictional narratives that had plays and stuff that had to do with prison and the prison system. And then I volunteered for an organization called GOSO that helps people who are reorienting themselves, who are dealing with reentry. I read Ulysses, I read the Odyssey a couple of times, I've read several other books. I read a lot of pamphlets that I downloaded from various nonprofit organizations. I've read a couple of books that were designed for people who are experiencing or going to experience reentry. One of them was called Behind Bars, and the other was called Beyond Bars. and those were extremely helpful. There's a book called Hell is a Very Small Place about people who've been in solitary confinement. Let me see if I can remember some of the others. But there was like a huge pile of things. And I mean, just about anything I could get my hands on was really helpful, because the prison system is it's really, unless you are involved in it, it's actually hard to like get in there and see what's going on for, reasons that are not surprising, right? Like I tried to go into the parole office, which, does everybody know where the parole office is?
They moved it from downtown.
Mm-hmm.
After that guy went in there and shot up some people.
Oh.
They moved it to Red Hook, quietly.
No, it's not Red Hook.
Yeah, they didn't.
It's not Red Hook.
Where is it?
It's on the Gowanus Canal,
That's
right
right.
across from the Whole Foods.
Yeah, that's right. Really?
Yeah, there's a scene in the book
Yeah.
that makes it clear exactly where it is, in relation to the Whole Foods, actually. Because that was one of those things I was like, this is really appalling. It's totally unmarked. If you looked at it, you'd be like, I have no idea what the hell that is.
Mm-hmm.
But it's the parole office. And it's super NIMBY. It's like a place where nobody's gonna look, and there's no residential anything near it. It's all like garages, and I think the Dykes lumber is over there too. But then all these like people at Whole Foods are walking right by. So anyway, I mean, that's a sort of central idea that I wanted to kind of look at. Like there are people among us, just walking down the street who are going through this kind of thing and not being visible.
And of course, one of the things the novel does, even as it's telling a story, is provide an education to you. If you don't know about some of these things, which, I did not, and just all the insane, impossible stipulations and requirements, and how, virtually like, a hair's breadth away from impossible, the parole system makes it for people to try, even people
Well,
like
parole
Carlotta who
is
are
actually
trying very hard.
Parole is actually trying to do right by people, and it's the prison system itself that I think has gone from, many years ago there was an idea that rehabilitation was part of the mix, right? And now it's pure punishment. There's nothing but, if people seem to think that if you are in prison, whether or not, nobody really delves into the idea of whether you deserve to be there or not. It's just, if bad things are happening to you in prison, then it's just part of the punishment that you're getting because, it's really insane. Because, everybody deserves some kind of dignity, and it just feels as if people have become kind of vicious about it, actually, and need to kind of look at that and say, like, what is this? Why are we doing this way? Maybe there are other ways to do it. Maybe we should just not do it at all anymore.
In terms of challenges, that's like another thing that you're setting for yourself in the book, because if you come back from prison, you have to fight for your dignity in all of these ways, but then you're like doubling and tripling down, because Carlotta, as a trans person, she's dealing with all this other, whole very deep layer of indignity, both like with her family and with all the other people who won't sort of like recognize her identity.
Right. Well, one of the ideas is that this is the weird thing for her. Like, freedom is weird for Carlotta and for people who are experiencing reentry. It's prison that is so, it's more, I don't take this the wrong way, but it's more like home. If you've been there for too long, it's become the normal thing, and coming back here is not. And looking around at people and trying to make sense of it, you're on your own. There's not that much support for people to where they can, get back into, and there's actually open hostility toward people who have a criminal record, right? So like, okay, let's make this even harder on people, you know, who already have it pretty hard.
You also chose very specific years for her to go away, because she goes away in 1993, comes back in 2015. And it's not only the gentrification, which we've talked about a little bit, where she walks around wondering if black children have been canceled, because she's not seeing them around in the neighborhood, but from the very first time that she gets off at the Port Authority and is like trying to figure out how to use a subway token. And asks the woman,
Not a Metro card.
Metro card, yeah.
no, but I'm saying she
thinks,
thinks they're still in existence, and she asked the woman, where can I get a subway token? She's like, subway token? 1995? I don't know what
She
something
says
like that.
1984. actually.
Yeah, something, whatever it is.
Yeah, I mean, there are just a lot of tiny things that, you know, they're almost like dog whistles for people who've been in New York as long as I have. But not completely unreadable for other people, or not. I mean, they won't trip anybody up who is not from New York, but they're like little, little gumdrops.
That's all you wanted.
Little gumdrops from New York.
No, just to comment on that, like the part with the C train, like her, when she's seeing all these new trains come by and then the C train comes and she's like, oh, thank God it hasn't changed.
Right, that passage is actually a little present to my husband, who likes how the C train does not seem to have changed for a very long time.
Well, I lose track of time. We're
Yep.
getting the wrap-up sign, the Oscar music back there. But so I don't know if there's like one more quick question or, oh, okay. So,
Well, thank you, everybody. Thank you, Dan.